The Varkey's empire wasted no time turning Earth into their personal factory. Across the planet, humans were rounded up like cattle, marched into sprawling camps where the air buzzed with the hum of alien machines. The Varkey's soldiers, with their golden scales and cold, unblinking eyes, towered over their captives, barking orders through translators. Work or die, they growled, forcing people to assemble towering constructs of metal and crystal, war machines, ships, things no one understood but everyone feared. Smoke choked the skies, and the ground trembled under the weight of the invaders' progress. High Overseer Croshill watched from his command ship, smug in his belief that humanity was broken. He couldn't have been more wrong. In the hidden basement in New Mexico, Tara Velis hunched over a tangle of wires and screens, her eyes burning from lack of sleep. The satellite network she'd hacked was a goldmine, grainy images of Varkey's camps, ship movements, and something else, a massive energy signal pulsing from their biggest ship, a hulking beast parked over the Atlantic. "That's their heart," she muttered, pointing at the screen. "Everything connects back to it." Dar. Lena Kors nodded, scribbling notes as she decoded scraps of Varkey's language from the chatter they'd intercepted. It was harsh, clipped, but she was getting the hang of it. "They call it the core nexus," she said. "If we hit that, they're blind." Jackson Reed paced nearby, restless. His hands itched to be back in a cockpit, not stuck underground. "We need to get closer," he said, voice low but firm. "I saw one of their shuttles up close when they shot me down. Small, fast. If we could grab one, we'd have a chance to scout that ship." Tara looked up, a slow grin spreading across her face. "You're crazy," she said, but her tone was approving. "Let's do it." The plan was simple but insane. A Varkey supply camp sat a few miles away, nestled in a desert valley. Every few hours, a shuttle landed to drop off materials, guarded by only a handful of soldiers. Jackson would lead a distraction, Tara would rig a trap, and Lena would cover them with data from the satellites. They waited until nightfall, when the camp's lights cast long shadows across the sand. Jackson crept forward, a stolen flare gun in hand, crude, but it'd do. He aimed at a stack of crates and fired. The flare streaked through the dark, bursting into a blinding red glow as it hit. The Varkey soldiers snarled, rushing toward the explosion, their claws glinting in the firelight. That's when Tara struck. She'd rigged a net of old cables and car batteries, hidden under the sand near the shuttle. As the soldiers scattered, she flipped a switch. Electricity arced through the net, stunning two of them mid-step, their bodies twitching as they fell. Jackson sprinted to the shuttle's open hatch, heart pounding. It was smaller than his jet, all sharp angles and glowing panels, but he'd flown worse. He slid into the pilot's seat, hands dancing over controls he didn't understand, until instinct kicked in. The shuttle hummed to life, lifting off just as Tara and Lena scrambled aboard, the camp erupting in chaos behind them. In the air, Jackson whooped, banking the stolen craft toward the horizon. "Told you I could fly it," he shouted. Tara rolled her eyes but couldn't hide her grin. Lena, clutching her laptop, pulled up the satellite feed. "Head east," she said. "That's where the core nexus is." The shuttle streaked over the ocean, its purple glow blending with the night sky. Below, Varkey's camps dotted the coastlines, humans toiling under floodlights. But something else was happening, small fires flickered in the distance, shouts echoing faintly. People were fighting back. Back in the basement, before they'd left, Tara had recorded a message. She'd patched it into the satellite network, bouncing it across every radio and screen she could reach. "This is Tara Velis," she'd said, voice steady. "The Varkeys think we're weak. They're wrong. We've got their tech, their signals. Fight smart, fight together. We're not done yet." She hadn't known if anyone would hear it, but now, seeing those flickers of resistance, she felt a spark of hope flare in her chest. The shuttle mission wasn't just about scouting, it was about proving they could hit back. As they neared the core nexus, a monstrous ship twice the size of anything they'd seen, Lena's scans lit up. "It's powering their whole fleet," she said, eyes wide. "Weapons, shields, everything runs through that thing." Tara studied the data, her engineer's mind racing. "If we cut the power, they're sitting ducks. But we'd need something big to crack it." Jackson glanced back, smirking. "I've got an idea, but you're not gonna like it." His plan was to ram the shuttle into the nexus, not to destroy it, but to get inside. "They won't expect us to use their own ship against them," he argued. Tara hesitated, then nodded. "Fine. But we're not dying today." She rigged the shuttle's engines to overload on impact, a controlled blast to punch through the hull. Lena patched into the controls, guiding them with her scans. They held their breath as the nexus loomed closer, its surface a maze of glowing conduits and jagged spires. The impact was deafening. The shuttle smashed into a weak spot Lena had pinpointed, the overloaded engines erupting in a flash of light. Metal screamed as they breached the hull, tumbling into a cavernous chamber lined with pulsing crystals, the core nexus itself. They staggered out, bruised but alive, the shuttle a smoking wreck behind them. Varki's alarms blared, but no soldiers came, not yet. Tara stared at the crystals, their energy humming through the air. "This is it," she whispered. "Their whole empire runs on this." Jackson scouted ahead, finding a maintenance hatch they could use to escape later. Lena knelt by the crystals, scanning them with her laptop. "It's fragile," she said, amazed. "One good disruption, and it'd collapse." Tara's mind whirled with possibilities, explosives, rewiring, anything to turn this power against the Varkis. They didn't have much time, footsteps echoed in the distance, heavy and clawed. "We need to move," Jackson urged, pulling them toward the hatch. They slipped out into the ship's underbelly, a maze of pipes and shadows, carrying the knowledge of the Nexus with them. Back on Earth, Tara's message had spread like wildfire. In a camp in Brazil, a group of workers sabotaged a Varki's machine, making it explode in a shower of sparks. In Tokyo, a teenager hacked a guard's weapon, turning it into a glorified flashlight. Across the globe, humans began to push back, not with brute force, but with cunning, creativity, the stuff the Varkis couldn't predict. Crosshole noticed the reports trickling in, small failures, odd glitches. He dismissed them at first, pacing his command deck. "These creatures are nothing," he snarled to his lieutenants. "Random chaos, not strategy." But doubt gnawed at him. The humans weren't acting like the broken slaves he'd expected. And then a junior officer burst in, scales paling. "Sir, one of our shuttles, it crashed into the Nexus. The crew's alive, but, it wasn't us flying it." The High Overseer froze, his claws digging into the console. For the first time, he wondered if he'd misjudged these soft-skinned things. In the stolen shuttle's wreckage, Tara's team had left a calling card, a scratched message in the hull, "We're just getting started." The spark of defiance had ignited, and it was spreading fast. The Varkis thought they'd conquered Earth, but humanity was about to teach them a lesson they'd never forget. The Varkis' empire had ruled the galaxy for 1,000 years, their towering ships carving fear into every star system they touched. Their scales shimmered like molten gold, and their claws could slice through metal as easily as air. To them, strength was everything, weakness meant extinction. So when their scouts stumbled across a small blue planet called Earth, they laughed. The creatures there, soft-skinned and clawless, barely seemed worth the effort. The High Overseer, a towering figure named Crosshole, stood on the bridge of his command ship, gazing at the swirling clouds below. "These humans will serve us," he growled, his voice echoing through the chamber. "Or they will perish." On Earth, life went on as usual. Tara Velis, a brilliant engineer with a knack for fixing anything, was tinkering with a busted radio tower in the hills of New Mexico. Her hands were stained with grease, and her dark hair stuck to her forehead from the heat. She loved solving puzzles, machines, signals, anything that challenged her mind. That evening, as the sun dipped low, she noticed something odd. The radio crackled with a strange hum, not like any signal she'd heard before. She adjusted the dials, her curiosity buzzing, and caught faint words in a language she didn't recognize. Then she saw it, a glint in the sky, too steady to be a plane, too bright to be a star. Miles away, Jackson Reed, a young pilot with a fearless streak, was testing a new jet over the Pacific. His sharp eyes spotted the same glint, but it multiplied. 1 became 3, then 10. He radioed his base, voice steady despite the chill creeping up his spine. "We've got unknowns up here. Big ones." The response was static, then silence. He banked his jet for a closer look, heart pounding as massive triangular ships broke through the clouds, their hulls glowing with an eerie purple light. Before he could react, a beam shot out, and his controls went dead. The jet spiraled, but Jackson ejected just in time, parachute blooming as he drifted toward the ocean. In a quiet lab in London, Dr. Lena Kors stared at her computer screen, tracking unusual energy spikes across the globe. A physicist with a mind sharper than most, she'd spent years studying signals from space, hoping to find proof of life out there. Now, she had it, and it terrified her. The spikes matched the locations of those glints people were reporting online. She called her colleague, voice trembling. "This isn't random. Something's coming." Hours later, the first Varkey's ships landed, their shadows swallowing cities whole. The invasion was swift. Varkey's soldiers poured out, barking orders through translators that turned their growls into stiff English. "Submit or die," they said, herding people into the streets. Their weapons hummed with power, frying cars and phones with a single pulse. Croswell broadcast his message worldwide, his golden face filling every screen that still worked. "We are the Varkeys. You are weak. You will build for us, or your world will burn." Most people froze, too shocked to fight. But not everyone. Tara hid in her workshop, watching through a cracked window as Varkey's soldiers marched past. Her mind raced. She'd seen their ships, heard their signals, there had to be a way to understand them. She grabbed her tools and the radio, retreating to a hidden basement she'd built years ago for storms. There, she met Jackson, soaked and bruised from his crash but alive, guided to her by a farmer who'd seen his parachute. "They're everywhere," he said, catching his breath. "Shot me down like it was nothing." Lena reached them later, having escaped London with a laptop full of data. The three sat in the dim light, piecing together what they knew. The Varkeys were strong, yes, but arrogant. They didn't bother hiding their signals or guarding their tech. Tara had an idea. "We've got old satellites up there, hundreds of them. If we can tap in, we might see what they're doing." Jackson nodded, already thinking of ways to move unseen. Lena pulled up her scans, pointing to a pattern. "Their ships run on something centralized. A power source, maybe. If we find it, we could hit them where it hurts." Days passed, and the Varkeys tightened their grip. They turned cities into work zones, forcing humans to assemble strange machines under the watch of their glowing rifles. But Tara's team worked in secret. She hacked into a forgotten satellite network, her fingers flying over keys as Jackson kept watch and Lena translated snippets of Varkey's chatter. The screens flickered to life, showing Varkey's ships hovering over every continent, their movements coordinated like a hive. Tara grinned despite the fear gnawing at her. "They think we're done. They're wrong." The part closed as Croswell surveyed his new domain from orbit, pleased with the humans' apparent surrender. He didn't notice the faint signal bouncing between ancient satellites, nor the three humans in a basement plotting his downfall. The Varkeys had come to dominate, but they'd awakened something they couldn't control, a spark of human defiance that would soon ignite the galaxy. The Varkeys' empire's grip on Earth was starting to slip, though High Overseer Croswell refused to admit it. From his command ship orbiting above the Atlantic, he watched reports flood in, malfunctions in camps, missing shuttles, humans vanishing into the night. His golden scales bristled as he slammed a claw against the console. "These pests are nothing," he roared to his officers. "Crush them harder." But the harder the Varkis pushed, the more humanity pushed back. In the shadows, Tara Velis, Jackson Reed, and Dr. Lena Kors were turning the invaders' own strength into their weakness. After escaping the core nexus, the trio had slipped back to their New Mexico hideout, battered but buzzing with energy. The chamber they'd seen, those glowing crystals powering the Varkis' fleet, was the key. Tara paced the basement, her mind racing like an engine on overdrive. "We can't just blow it up," she said, hands sketching invisible blueprints in the air. "We need something they won't see coming." Lena, hunched over her laptop, nodded. "The crystals are sensitive to frequency disruptions. If we hit them with the right signal, they'd overload, shut down everything." Jackson grinned, leaning against the wall. "So we make a weapon. Something small, sneaky. I like it." Tara got to work, scavenging parts from the wrecked Varkis shuttle they'd crashed. Wires, circuits, a cracked energy cell, she pieced them together with the focus of someone who'd spent her life fixing the unfixable. By dawn, she held a makeshift device the size of a football, its surface a mess of exposed metal and blinking lights. "It's ugly," she admitted, "but it'll send a pulse to fry those crystals. We just need to get close again." Lena tested it with her scans, eyes lighting up. "It's crude, but it could work. One blast, and their whole network goes dark." Jackson had his own mission. The stolen shuttle was gone, but the Varkis had dozens more parked in camps worldwide. He gathered a ragtag crew, survivors who'd heard Tara's broadcast and found their way to the hideout. There was Mia, a mechanic with a sharp tongue, and Carlos, a former soldier who'd escaped a camp in Texas. Jackson trained them in a dusty field, using sticks to mimic controls. "These shuttles fly fast," he told them, voice steady. "We hit their landing zones, grab what we can, and get out. No hero stuff, just results." They nodded, fear mixing with fire in their eyes. The first raid hit a camp in Arizona at midnight. Jackson led the charge, darting through the shadows as Mia hotwired a Varkis patrol drone to crash into a guard post. The explosion lit up the night, drawing soldiers away. Carlos slipped in, silent as a ghost, and climbed into a shuttle's cockpit. He'd never flown before, but Jackson's crash course paid off. The craft lifted off, wobbling but airborne, as the team cheered from below. They escaped with 2 shuttles and a crate of Varkis tech, leaving the camp in chaos. Word spread fast, the humans were fighting back, and they were winning. Meanwhile, Lena risked everything to test her theory. She needed a live Varkis signal to calibrate Tara's pulse device, so she snuck into a ruined radio station near the hideout, dragging a tangle of antennas with her. The Varkis had a patrol nearby, their voices crackling through the airwaves. Lena's hands shook as she tuned in, translating their growls. "They're angry," she whispered to herself, scribbling notes. "Something about losses in Sector 7. A shadow loomed outside, a Varkis soldier, claws gleaming. She froze, but the soldier moved on, too focused on barking orders to notice her. Lena exhaled, finished her tweaks, and slipped away, the device now perfectly tuned. Across the globe, Tara's message had ignited a wildfire of rebellion. In Mumbai, a group of coders hacked Varkis surveillance drones, turning them into flying prank machines that blasted music over camps. In Moscow, workers sabotaged a war machine's joints, making it collapse mid-assembly. Each act was small, but together, they were a tidal wave. The Varkis couldn't keep up, their rigid plans crumbled under human chaos. Crosshole doubled patrols, his temper flaring. "Find their leaders," he snarled. "End this nonsense." But the humans had no leaders, just a shared spark that refused to die. Tara's team struck next, targeting a Varkey's outpost in Nevada. Jackson flew one of the stolen shuttles, Mia at his side, while Tara and Lena rode in the second with Carlos. The outpost was a fuel depot, its tanks glowing with the same purple energy as the Nexus. Tara's plan was simple: test the pulse device on a smaller scale. They swooped in low, dodging laser fire as Varkey's soldiers scrambled below. Tara leaned out the hatch, pulse device in hand, and activated it. A low hum ripped through the air, invisible but powerful. The tanks flickered, then exploded in a cascade of sparks, the outpost plunging into darkness. Jackson whooped as they pulled away. "It works. We've got them now." The victory was a turning point. Survivors everywhere took notice, their hope surging. In the hideout, Tara's team pored over satellite feeds, planning their next move. The core Nexus was still the prize. If they could hit it with the pulse, the Varkey's fleet would collapse. But the Nexus was guarded now, its hull bristling with new defenses after their shuttle crash. "They're scared," Lena said, studying the scans. "That's why they're locking it down." Tara nodded, determination hardening her features. "Good. Let's give them something to really fear." The Varkey's response was brutal. Croshull ordered a show of force, ships bombed empty fields to intimidate, soldiers raided camps to root out rebels. In one raid, they caught a group in Paris, dragging them to a public square. "This is your fate," a Varkey's officer bellowed, raising a glowing rifle. But before he could fire, a stolen shuttle roared overhead, dropping smoke bombs scavenged from an old military base. The rebels vanished in the haze, saved by a pilot who'd heard Tara's call. The Varkeys fired blindly, their rage growing as humans slipped through their claws again and again. Back in orbit, Croshull's lieutenants whispered doubts. "The humans adapt too fast," one said, scales dimming with worry. "Their tricks multiply." Croshull silenced them with a glare, but the truth gnawed at him. The outpost's loss wasn't random, it was precise, deliberate. He summoned his engineers. "Reinforce the Nexus," he ordered. "They'll come for it. Let them try." The engineers scurried off, bolting extra shields to the ship, but their confidence was fading. Humanity wasn't just resisting, they were rewriting the rules. Tara's team prepared for the big strike. She built more pulse devices, tweaking each one with Lena's data. Jackson drilled his pilots, their stolen fleet growing with every raid. Carlos and Mia scavenged weapons, turning Varkey's scraps into tools of war. The hideout buzzed with activity, a mix of fear and excitement. "We're not just surviving," Tara told them one night, her voice fierce. "We're taking our planet back." Cheers erupted, the sound echoing into the desert. The part ended with Croshull staring at Earth from his bridge, the blue planet no longer a prize but a threat. Reports of human victories piled up, outposts gone, ships stolen, morale cracking. He clenched his claws, vowing to crush this uprising. But deep down, a flicker of unease stirred. The Varkeys had underestimated their prey, and now the tide was turning. In the hideout, Tara held her pulse device, its lights reflecting in her eyes. "Next stop," she said, "the Nexus." The fight was far from over, but humanity was ready to roar. The Varkeys' empire's reign over Earth had reached its breaking point. High Overseer Croshull stood on the bridge of his command ship, the core Nexus humming behind him like a heartbeat. His golden scales gleamed with fury as he watched the planet below, now a patchwork of rebellion. Human attacks had crippled outposts, stolen ships, and chipped away at his fleet's might. "They are insects," he roared, slamming a claw into the console. "We will burn their world to ash." But his officers exchanged uneasy glances. The humans weren't just fighting, they were winning, and the Nexus, the Empire's lifeline, was in their sights. In the New Mexico hideout, Tara Velis held her final briefing. The basement was packed with survivors, pilots, scavengers, coders, all united by her voice on the radio weeks ago. She stood beside a table cluttered with pulse devices, their lights flickering like tiny stars. "This ends today," she said, her tone steady but fierce. "We hit the Nexus, shut down their power, and take back our home." Jackson Reed flashed a grin, leaning on a stolen Varkey's shuttle. "I've got the flyboys ready. We'll clear the skies." Dr. Lena Kors adjusted her glasses, clutching her laptop. "I'll get us inside. One pulse, and it's over." The plan was bold, borderline reckless, but that's what made it human. Jackson's team of pilots would attack the Varkey's fleet head-on, drawing their fire with stolen shuttles. Tara and her strike team would sneak aboard the Nexus in a captured transport, using the chaos as cover. Lena would guide them to the crystal chamber, where the pulse devices would do their work. Every piece had to fall into place, or they'd be dust. "No pressure," Jackson quipped, earning a smirk from Tara. "Just don't crash this time," she shot back. Dawn broke as the assault began. Jackson led his squadron into the sky, a mismatched fleet of Varkey's shuttles and patched-up human planes roaring toward the Atlantic. The Varkeys responded fast, their warships spitting purple energy beams that lit up the clouds. Jackson banked hard, dodging a blast, and fired back with a scavenged laser Mia had rigged. "Eat that," he shouted as a Varkey's fighter spiraled down in flames. His team weaved through the chaos, Mia blasting a warship's engines, Carlos ramming a drone swarm, keeping the enemy busy. Tara's transport slipped through the fray, disguised as a Varkey supply ship thanks to Lena's hacked codes. Inside, Tara gripped her pulse device, her heart pounding. Lena sat beside her, eyes glued to her laptop, tracking the Nexus's defenses. "Shields are up, but they're distracted," she said. "We've got a window." The transport shuddered as it docked, the hatch hissing open to reveal a corridor of gleaming metal and glowing conduits. Varkey's soldiers rushed past, too focused on the battle outside to notice the intruders. Tara led the way, her team, 5 scrappy fighters armed with homemade weapons, following close. They reached the crystal chamber, its walls pulsing with purple light. The air buzzed with energy, making Tara's skin prickle. Lena knelt by the crystals, plugging her laptop into a port she'd spotted last time. "I can amplify the pulse," she said, fingers flying over keys. "Give me 2 minutes." Tara nodded, posting guards at the door. Outside, the battle raged, Jackson's voice crackled over a comm scavenged from the shuttle. "We're taking hits, but they're scattered. Hurry." A Varkey's patrol approached, claws clicking on the floor. Tara's team opened fire, sparks flying as they held the line. Lena finished just as the soldiers breached the door. "It's ready," she yelled, ducking as Tara activated the pulse device. A low hum built, then erupted into a wave of sound and light. The crystals flared, cracked spiderwebbing across their surfaces. The chamber shook, alarms screaming as the Nexus's power faltered. Tara grabbed Lena, pulling her toward the exit. "Go," she shouted. The team bolted, dodging falling debris as the crystals began to shatter, their glow fading to black. In orbit, the Varkey's fleet froze. Warships went dark, drifting like dead fish in the sky. Jackson whooped as his squadron mopped up the stragglers, their lasers cutting through unshielded hulls. "They're done," he yelled over the comm on the Nexus, Crosshole staggered as the bridge lights flickered out. "Impossible," he hissed, staring at screens filled with static. His officers scrambled, shouting orders that went nowhere. The Empire's heart had stopped, and humanity had stopped it. Tara's team fought their way to the transport, Varkey's soldiers in disarray around them. They launched just as the Nexus trembled, its hull cracking under the strain of its own failing systems. From the cockpit, Tara watched it implode, a slow, beautiful collapse of metal and light sinking into the ocean. Cheers erupted behind her, the team's exhaustion giving way to triumph. "We did it," Lena whispered, almost disbelieving. Tara smiled, a fierce pride burning in her chest. "Yeah, we did. The Varkey's surrender came hours later. Croshull, his scales dulled by defeat, broadcast a message across Earth, his voice trembling through translators. "We yield. Your world is yours." His fleet, what was left of it, hovered limply, awaiting orders that never came. On the ground, humans emerged from hiding, staring at the sky in awe. Camps emptied as survivors tore down Varkey's machines, their shouts of joy echoing through cities and fields. The empire that had crushed 1,000 worlds had fallen to one it underestimated. Jackson landed his shuttle near the hideout, greeted by a crowd of grinning rebels. "Told you I wouldn't crash," he said, clapping Tara on the shoulder as she stepped off the transport. She laughed, the sound raw but real. Lena joined them, clutching her laptop like a trophy. "We turned their tech against them," she said. "That's what humans do." The trio stood together, watching the sun set on a free Earth, the weight of their victory sinking in. The galaxy took notice. Across star systems, species whispered about the soft-skinned creatures who toppled an empire with scavenged junk and sheer will. The Varkeys became a cautionary tale, their once mighty ships scavenged by humans eager to explore the stars. Tara addressed the survivors that night, her voice carried by the same satellite network she'd used to spark the fight. "We're not just survivors," she said. "We're builders, dreamers. The universe is ours now, let's see what's out there." The story closed with Earth reclaiming its place, not as a conquered planet but as a beacon of what humanity could do. Jackson dreamed of flying among the stars, tweaking shuttles into something new. Lena pored over Varkey's data, her curiosity insatiable. Tara stood on a hill, looking up at the night sky, a wrench in her hand and a spark in her eyes. The Varkeys had come to dominate, but humans had turned their invasion into a launch pad. No empire could survive the day humanity took revenge, and now, the galaxy was watching, waiting for what came next.